Welcome back. In this video, we will have a look at shared preferences in Flutter. So this is looking at basically a package called shared_preferences. So if you go to pub.dev, you can go and you can open up that package called shared preferences. And you can see that it comes from the flutter.dev team. Okay, so if you go into shared preferences, you can read there and it says shared preferences wraps platform-specific persistent storage for simple data. So this is a way for us to be able to save simple data. So we will be starting a new section here where we'll be looking at how to persist data on your phone. So the shared preferences helps us with persisting really simple data. And this translates back to NS user defaults on iOS and Mac and shared preferences on Android. Okay, so shared preferences is also the name that we see here, shared preferences. This could be that both Android and Flutter also exists in the Google ecosystem. And that's probably why it's also called shared preferences. Okay, but you can see that this works both for iOS, macOS, and also in Android. And it says data may be persisted to disk asynchronously, and there's no guarantee that writes will be persisted to disk after returning. So this plugin must not be used for storing critical data. Okay, so where do we use shared preferences? Basically, most of the time, you will have some sort of settings page. So this is the app that we will be building. It's really very simple, just one data value that we're changing. And you can see if I click it, the theme changes. But that's fine. That we can do with provider only. But what if we restart this app now? Because if it's light and I restart this app, you will see that as part of this also, we will have a small loading screen, and then it comes up and then you can see it's the light theme. If I set it to black, and let me just rerun this quickly again, you will see that we will see the logo again, and then we see the black settings page or the dark theme. Okay, so we are trying to persist our data. So even if I go out, I close this app totally and I come back, it will still be the dark theme. And if I make the selection to be the light theme, I go out of this app and I come back in, it should still be the light theme. So shared preferences, in the name it says preferences, and that translates back to the settings. What is the preference of the user for your specific app? Maybe there's theme settings, maybe it's whether to keep the user logged in, or whatever type of situation you can run into where you need to store very simple, small pieces of data. Then you can do so using shared preferences. So what is shared preferences? Basically a small little file on your phone that is in the form of a map that contains key and value pairs. In this case, it will normally be string values or string as the key, and then any type of dynamic value there. Okay, so shared preferences, normally used for settings of your app. And even though they say there's no guarantee that writes will be persisted to disk after returning, I really never had problems with this before where it's actually not working. So if you set this up correctly, you will have no problems with this. Right, so in order to get this into your application, you will need to go to installing, and you can use this shared preferences 2.0.6. So you can copy that. Now let's go to our new Flutter application. It looks like this. I've just created a new Flutter application called shared prefs video. I will go into my pubspec.yaml, and directly underneath that Cupertino icons, this is where I can go and add shared preferences. At the same time, I'm also going to add provider here because provider will still help us to do the state management here. So I'm going to go with 5.0.0. And then if we save, it will automatically add that into my project folder. Okay, while that is busy, you can just go and search online on Google for logo free. And if you click on images, this is one of the first ones that pops up. So I just took any one there, but I mean, you can take any of these free logos, just download it. After downloading that file, you can go into your downloads folder, copy that file. So I'm just going to copy it. And then when you're done copying it, you can go back to your project folder. On that lib folder of yours, you can right click and you can say Reveal in File Explorer. And then let's go and create the assets folder here. So I'm going to say new folder. Let's call it assets. Inside of assets, if you wanted to, because we don't have any other assets, you could have just left it right in here. but let's make an images folder as well. And then I'm going to paste that file in the images folder. Okay, so then I can see assets, images, logo. So let's go and add that to the pubspec.yaml also. So at the bottom, we've got your images there, control /. Let's remove all of these. And ours will be assets/images /. And I can save, and that will then import that picture for me also so that I can use it in coding. Right, so that's it then. So we've got the shared preferences. And we also got the logo. So I'm going to close down this browser now and we can continue to our application. Okay, so this is the application that we will be building. So we're going to use shared preferences to save this value, whether it's the dark theme or not, and make sure that our app works as expected. Right, so just note one thing. When you added this shared preferences there, you can see that it added this in your lib folder, a generated plugin registrant. That basically just helps you to initialize the shared preferences plugin. Okay, so please keep it there, but we will create our own folders now in lib. So as normally, we will create a models folder there where we will have our model, and our model will be in, let's say, theme_settings . So we will come to this class now. So we'll have models and we'll have our theme settings there, where everything regarding this theme will be placed inside of this file, and that includes the class that provider will provide the data for me. Now let's go into lib again and create another folder, and we can call it pages. And we will only have one page there, and that is the settings page. So I'm going to call it settings . And that's the only page that I will have. Right, so let's go into our main.dart file. And in the main.dart, I'm going to delete everything that we started with there. So everything until the bottom, I'm going to delete except for the main function at the top. Create a stateless widget called my app. And for this stateless widget, we will have a material app. And this material app will have a home screen, or will have a home. But we still need to go and set up that home. So let's go to settings, and settings will be our starting page. So it's going to be import, and we're going to use material.dart. And this one will again be a stateless widget, and let's call this one settings. Okay, so we'll come back to settings now. Let's go to main.dart, and the home for this material app will then be settings. Okay, so it's easier if you can actually select it from the list there, then it also auto imports, and then you don't have any problems. Okay, so it's going to go from my app, which is a material app, to settings. Now settings, we can start off with a scaffold. The scaffold will have an app bar with a title, and let's set the title as settings. Now I think we're at the stage where we can actually start running this to see what we get. So run this, and you should see the settings app bar at the top. Right, so there we can see our app bar at the top, and let's continue with the scaffold. So let's say in the body of the scaffold, we will have a column. The column will have children there. The children, let's start off with a normal card, and the card is there just to show you some bit more theme changes there. Okay, so for this child, I'm just going to use, or for the card, I'm just going to use a child called a list tile. And that list style, you know the list style already, but that's basically just got a leading, a title, a subtitle, a trailing. So in our case, I'm just going to use a normal title with a text widget there. And this one will just say something like theme. Okay, so if you save it, you can see it just says theme there. Okay, and then if you remember from that example project we had previously that we tested, we also had some sort of switch there now. So let's do that switch quickly. And to do the switch, it's just a normal switch list tile. Now, if you hover over your switch list tile, you can see that it needs a value and it needs an onChanged. So let's set the value quickly. So the value you will see is just a true or a false value. It's Boolean. So from the start, let's just call it, or let's just use it as false. And let's go to onChanged, and we will use that opening and closing brackets. And by saving now, you will already see your switch there. It won't work because it needs to change according to the state. So if I change this, this value will need to change, and it's this value that was passed in. So if I change it here, that value will change, and it should also change there. So we will get to that part now. Also, something else that we can add is a title. And this title, again, is just a widget, which means you can have a row here with pictures and whatever you want. In our case, we will just name it dark theme. So if I say dark theme there, it means is the dark theme on or is it off? Currently it's off. If I want to have it on, I can start off with a true there and save, and now it's on. Okay, so we will come back to this UI part on how we need to change this value so that we can actually get some changes on this dark theme. Okay, so what we could have done with normal set state is have a Boolean variable declared at the top, let's say having that as false, and then have that variable here, and in the brackets, when this value changes, we use the set state and we change that value accordingly, because this value here is a Boolean. So we set our variable at the top, then equal to this value that was passed in, and then we're changing this value. And this is how you'll get this to switch on and off. Okay, but we will be using not set state, we will be using provider. Okay, so we can save now. And the thing that we can see here that we need to get provided is in fact this dark theme. So if you remember from previous videos I did, if you go to your main and you go into your material app, you can see that there's a theme that we can set there. And that theme is basically taking in theme data. Now this theme data, I can then go and test if the dark theme is selected or if it's off, then we can show a light theme. And if this one is selected, then we can go and show a dark theme. Okay, so all will be done inside of this material app to make changes to the theme. And you've seen that that data is theme data. So in the My App, we will be able to listen to changes here using consumer. So we will set up that later. And also we will make the change here and then apply it inside of the material app. So we're going to listen inside of the material app, but we will make the changes here on the setting page. Okay, so let's go into settings or to theme settings now, which will become our model class for the provider. So I'm just going to have an import statement at the top. Let's say material dot again, and we will have a class called theme settings. It will be with a change notifier, and we will have our opening and closing braces. Okay. So right at the top here, what I want to do is to add these themes that we're going to use now. So remember, if I start typing theme here, if you hover over it, you can see that theme is of type theme data. So I'm going to create two theme datas, one for light and one for the dark theme. Now let's go back to settings. Right, so at the top, let's start with the first one, theme data. And let's call this one light theme. And the light theme will be a new theme data. And you can see that hovering over that theme data, there's really a lot of things that you can set for your specific theme. So I'm not going to go into all of that, but just make a few changes. For example, I'm going to set the brightness to a brightness dot light for the light theme and dark for the dark theme. I'm going to have a primary swatch there. And I'm going to set that to a colors dot blue, and then we will also have an accent color, and let's set the to colors dot light blue accent, and set the scaffold background color to colors dot gray, and maybe let's give it a shade of 100. Now with the introduction of null safety, sometimes you get, if you go to colors dot gray, this doesn't work. So another way of doing this is to put a dot there and say just shade 100. So that will give you exactly the same color. So it's up to you which one you want to use there. There's also a lighter 150, which you can also use. Okay, so that is the light theme. I'm just going to copy this one. Let's paste it, and we call this one dark theme. Let's just take one R there. Okay, so this one will be the dark theme. So instead of light, we will have dark there. For the rest, it will stay the same. And maybe for this background color, we can have a black color there. So let's go with black 87. Okay, so basically the same colors, but the brightness light, the brightness dark. There it's a gray background, a light gray, and here it is a black 87. Okay, so what we can do then is we can actually go now to main.dot. And we can set the theme here. For example, I can use, let's say, dark. And you can see I don't need to use a class dot something. It automatically picks up the dark theme, which means that these values here is in fact now global variables that we use. So why did I put it in this class or inside of this file? just to make sure that everything about themes is in one file, and it's easy then to go and have a look at these themes. And I know where to go if I want to make theme changes. Okay, so in my main.dart, I can use dark theme and I will see the dark theme, and you can see it's already there. Okay, same thing again, I can go back to main and I can change this to the light theme. That was the default one. If I save, we're back to light. Okay, so already we can see that these are the theme changes that we're going to make, but it will depend on this value that we click there. Okay, so let's see how we can set up this. Okay, so we're going to use a Boolean value because you can see also then where you use this in the settings page, it works with a Boolean value either on or off. It's the dark theme or it's not. So we're going to use a Boolean variable for that, and we're going to call it dark theme. And you can see I'm having it as private. That's normally what we do. I'm going to set it up initially as false. And then we can also have a getter for this. So I'm going to use bool get dark theme, and we will be returning back this dark theme. Right, now another thing that we will also be using here is called shared preferences. So make sure you import this class shared preferences, and it will auto import from the package called shared preferences. So what we want to do is as soon as this value changes from false to true or from true to false, we want to save that value now to make sure that we can also, when the app starts from the beginning again, we can still remember the choice that the user made. Okay, so shared preferences can be nullable, and that's why I'll just indicate that it's nullable there. And I'm going to use it as underscore preferences. Okay, so then we will need one function, and I'm going to use this function as a private function because we will only run it inside of this class called theme settings, or this file called theme settings. So let's call this one initialize preferences. Okay, so it's just going to be initialize prefs. It will be an asynchronous function. And inside of this function, I want to basically check whether this value is null, which means that we have not yet initialized it. So I'm going to say if preferences is equal to null, then we know it's the very first time we run this now, and we can start initializing it. So then I'm going to say, let's go to preferences. We set it equal to await shared preferences dot get instance. And that gets an instance of the shared preferences file for this specific app, which is just a map of key value pairs, and we can start working with it. So whenever we call initialize prefs, it's going to first check if it is equal to null. It means we have not made the connection yet. Then we will make the connection by just saying preferences equals await shared preferences dot get instance. But if it's not null, then we don't do anything. Then we know it's already initialized. We have that value already. So you'll see where we're going to use this initialize prefs. The next function that we're going to use, which is also going to be a private function, will be called load settings from the preferences file. So just call it load settings from prefs. Again, this one will be an asynchronous function. And what we're going to do in here is to run await, and we're going to call this initialize preferences. So we will wait for this preferences to be initialized. So it's going to run this part. It will check if the preferences is null. If it is, we will initialize it. So after that line, we know now it's been initialized, and now we can start loading the data from the preferences file. And what I want to get back is this dark theme. So remember, we want to save this value. So the next function we'll do is also to see how you can save this value. So we save this value now. In order to load it, we're going to say dark theme equals, go to that preferences file, which can be nullable. So I'm going to indicate it as nullable, or you can force it and basically say that it will never be null because we're already doing the null check there. But in any case, let's keep it as the question mark. I don't like the exclamation mark that much. Okay, so the preferences file, on that preferences, you can call get. Now just look at the options available. You've got get double, int, keys, string, string list, get bool. And that's basically all getters that you can use. So it gives you a limited amount of values that you can actually save with preferences. So please don't overuse preferences to try and save big data or try to save data that should actually go into an SQL database. Okay, so in our case, we will just be working with a Boolean. So I will get back a Boolean, and you can see it wants the key. So obviously, wherever you create this new value and where you get it back, you need to use the same key. So the key I'm going to use here is called dark theme, but you can name it whatever you want. And now you can also see if you hover over this, the value of type bool with a question mark can't be assigned to a variable of type bool. So what we're going to do here is to just do that null check quickly again. So remember, the double question mark is basically the if null statement. So if this whole part there is in fact null, which means that we have not saved dark theme yet, then we will just be returning back a false. So what is going to happen here? We're going to make a connection to the file, which is just a map with key value pairs, and we're going to get a Boolean called dark theme. If it exists, it's going to save whatever we saved there. So if there's a false saved, it will be a false in dark theme. If there's a true, it will be true. But if there's nothing yet saved with this key name, with dark theme, then we will just return back a false. So then the dark theme will be false, which means the user never made a change before, which means it should still be on the false, which is the light theme. Okay, and then after we get back that value, we can just go and say, let's notify all the listeners. So we will have some listeners for this dark theme, and our main listener will be right here in the material app. It will be here on this line. So we will test for that value called dark theme, and we'll make a choice here. Okay, so wherever it's listening, we need to notify the listener. Right, so that's how we will load the settings from the preferences file. And then we will also have a save settings to the prefs file. Okay, so just the other way around now. Asynchronous again, same thing again. We will say await, and we will initialize the preferences just to make sure that we've got a connection to that, just to make sure that we've got a connection to this preferences file before we continue. Now that we know after this line that we've got a connection to the preferences file, we can start saving the new value. So we can go to preferences now, and again, it can be nullable, same as we did there. But now instead of saying get Boolean to get a value back, we will set the value. So we're going to say set bool. And you can see for this, we've got a key and a value pair that we need to specify. Okay, so the key obviously must be exactly the same as we had there. So it must be dark theme, and then the value will be the value either true or false. So in our case, it will be our dark theme. So that value will either be true or false, depending on what the user made the selection there. And because this part will just be saving the value, I'm not going to notify any listeners. So it will save the value, and then after saving the value, we can close the app and come back. But when it loads back again, it gets the new value. Okay, so we'll see how that works now, because there's another function that we also need to use, and that is the toggle theme. Now, this function will actually help us to run whatever we do here. So when we click on this button, we want to toggle the theme. So now if the theme is currently true, which means it is the dark theme, then we want to change it to false. And if it's currently false, then we want to change it to true. So basically we're going to say, go to that dark theme and give it the new value of not dark theme. Okay, so if the value is in fact true, then not true will become false. And if the value is false, then not false will become true. So we are just toggling the value. So it will work nicely with the switch, because clicking the switch, we will call toggle theme, which will change the value from true to false or from false to true. And then it's very important then, when we make that change, we want to directly go and save the settings to preferences. So we want to make sure that we actually then save this dark theme. So there you can see we call set bool and we set the Boolean value. So directly after we change it, we will call save settings prefs or to prefs, and then we can actually go and say notify the listeners. Because now if we click there, we want to see the change immediately, not just when we restart the app. Right, and that's it basically for this class, except for one thing. We did not use this load settings from prefs, and because it's private, you cannot use it outside of this file. So where am I going to use it? I'm going to create a theme settings constructor. And inside of the constructor, I will call load settings from preferences. So as soon as we create an instance of this theme settings, we will call load settings from prefs. It will make the connection to the file. So obviously the very first time this file or this instance runs, or this application runs, we will have nothing saved to that preferences file. So then it will go and see, well, this whole part is null, which means it's going to assign a false. So you'll see when the app starts, it will then be the normal light theme, because initially it should be false. Well, that's also the value we give it there, but initially it will be false also. So we've got the dark theme then set, and if we saved it before, it will get that new value and save it, or get that value and just save it. So when we start off this theme settings, creating an instance of this, automatically we will load the settings from prefs and it will give us this initial value. And it will also notify all the listeners, so it updates the theme if necessary. Okay, so we'll get back to this again and make sure that you understand what's going on again, but this is basically it for our theme settings. So we've got our two themes declared at the top. We've got our dark theme, that's one of the values that needs to get provided. And as part of this whole thing, we are making sure also that we are saving and getting back the data as needed. Right, so let's go to the main dot, because this is where we want to start listening right there. Okay, so over this material app, we will need to go and provide a change notifier, or the change notifier provider. But because you could also sit with some roots, or maybe you want to have more than one model provided here, it's always a good thing to have your multi-provider here. Although I will only be using one provider, it's always best to have your multi-provider here. Okay, so for your multi-provider, you can see it needs a name parameter called providers. Okay, so I'm going to use providers there, and I'm going to use the change notifier provider. So you can have more than one provider here. For now, I'm just going to use this one. So for your change notifier provider, there must be the create parameter. Okay, so let's go into create. And for the create, I'm just going to use the fat arrow one, the context with the fat arrow. And the class that we want the provider to provide for us is now this class called theme settings. So if I go back, I will use theme settings there, choose it from the list, then you know the import statement is already at the top. Okay, now what happens here? What happens inside of this create statement? You can see that a new instance of theme settings was created. So what will happen? It will create this new instance and it will automatically call load settings from prefs. So it's going to start this part, it's going to check, initialize it, see that it is null currently, it will make the connection to it, and it will get the dark theme's value, in this case as false, because we haven't made any changes yet. So the dark theme will be false and it will notify all listeners. Okay, currently we don't have any listeners, but this is what this part is doing now. So that theme settings is creating a new instance of it, and it's providing that instance for my whole app. So anything now changing in dark theme or wherever, and we call notify listeners, all the listeners will be notified. And you can see there's only two places where we notify the listeners. After we've loading the data and after we made a change in this switch. Okay. So let's go to main.dot. So now, where do we want to listen for it? So now we are providing this instance throughout the app, but I want to listen to this inside of this material app also. So above this material app, I'm going to use the consumer. Now for the consumer, you need to specify the type that we're listening for. In our case, it is the theme settings, like we have there. That's the class that we're listening for, or the instance of the class that we're listening for called theme settings. Now, if you hover over consumer, you can see it needs a builder. So remember this again. I'm just going to cut the whole material app there, remove the child, replace it with a builder, choose the second one with the curly braces, and let's return back that whole material app again. And at the end, do not close it off with a comma, but a semicolon. Right, so if you look at consumer now, it's providing theme settings, and if you look at that value, it is the theme settings there that it's providing in this value, and it's an instance of this theme settings. It's the same instance there that it's providing. So we can now start listening for this. So inside of the material app, here where we've got light theme, we can now start listening for that value, which means that we can test for this value. So by just going to value, I've got the instance, put the dot there, I can get the dark theme. So now I can test if value.dark theme, which means if the value.dark theme is true, then I want to actually show the dark theme. Otherwise, I will be showing the light theme. Okay, so if I save it now, we should only see the light theme because initially it's false. So really not a lot that we can see right now. Okay, so we're testing if the value.dark theme and value.dark theme is currently false. So that is why we see the light theme. So just remember this whole statement there is the ternary operator, and we're checking if this part is true, then do the dark theme. Otherwise, do the light theme. Okay. Right, so at this stage, it's all light still because the initial value is false. Now, where can we go and make the change? Let's go to our settings page now. So on our settings page, in this switch list tile, we want to also listen for that change because this value here needs to actually listen for that change. But inside of onChange, we will actually make the change. Okay, so there's two parts here. This switch list tile also needs to update when we click there because it should move the switch. Okay, so we're going to listen here. But here we're going to provide the change inside of the onChanged. Okay, so two things happening here. So on top of this switch list tile, I'm going to use the consumer and just make sure that it imports your provider at the top. And for this consumer, we will be looking at the type theme settings again. Okay, exactly the same thing. Now for consumer, you will see that we need a builder. So again, this whole switch list tile, I'm going to select, cut it out, remove the child, replace it with builder, wait for it, use the one with the curly braces, and I'm going to say return, paste back the value, and end it off with a semicolon. Right, let me save again. Okay, so we've got consumer now again. This marks the switch list tile as something that can change when this value changes. And that value is again the instance of theme settings. So in the value here, I actually want to go and say value.darkTheme. Now let me see if I save this. You can see how the switch moved now because the initial value is still false. But now if I click on it, I want to now make the change and I want to call this toggle theme because then dark theme will change. We will save it on the shared preferences file and we will notify the listeners. Okay, so if I go back to settings, inside of this pod, I want to call now this toggle theme as soon as it gets clicked. Now just note that the value there and value there is different. So maybe this one you can change to new value even though we will not be using this value. If you had to use set state, then yes, you would have used this new value. But we have this toggle function, toggle theme, and that's the one we're going to use. Okay, so in order to use that toggle theme, we're going to use that same value that we have here, which is this one, still the instance theme settings. I can use that value, dot. And if you go down, you will see your toggle theme there. And that's all I need to do. So as soon as I click that, it's going to say toggle theme. What is toggle theme going to do? It's going to set the dark theme to something else. So if dark theme was true, then not true will become false. If it was false, not false becomes true. Then we save that new value to the preferences file and we notify all listeners. So let's see if this works. Let's save it. Now let me just change that. Everything works as expected. Okay, so now you can see dark theme off, so it's the light one, dark theme on, then it's the dark theme. Okay, nicely changing between light and dark. Okay, so now let's see if these are actually saved, which means that if I rerun this app now, I should still see the dark theme. Okay, so there you can see dark. If I make it light and I run it again, you'll see the light theme. Okay, let's change it to dark again. Run it. There's the dark theme. But did you see something happening there? Because we're initially setting this to false right from the start, if you run this, you will see it starts the white theme first and then it shows you the black, but it's very fast. So yeah, this is quite irritating when it does that. So what you can do, and that's what a lot of people do with their apps, is they have some sort of loading screen to make sure that you load all of that data before your app starts actually. Okay, so in order to make that part work, I will create a new class that will basically be my loading screen. But before I get there, I want to change these theme settings. And maybe it's not the best place to also put your loading screen, but because we're loading the shared preferences, which is the theme settings, maybe we can also add it here. But you could have had another file that you also provide in order for this to work. So in my case now, what I'm going to do here is to add another Boolean value here. And this one will just be called, let's call it done loading. And we're going to set it initially to false as well. So which means that right from the start of the app, we want to have that loading screen showing. So done loading should be false. And as soon as we are done loading, we will basically set this to true again. Now let's just get a getter for this one also. So I'm going to use bool get, and let's call it done loading. And we will be returning back that done loading. Now I'm just going to use a normal setter here also for the loading part. So I'm going to use, let's say loading. Let's make this one also loading so that we have the same thing there. So we've got get loading there, and it will return done loading. And then we're going to use this set loading, and we will set it with a Boolean value. Let's call it value there. And for the setter, if it is done loading then, so at the beginning it will be false, and if it's done, we will call loading and we pass in true. Actually, let's make this one done loading, and let's make this one also done loading. Then it makes a bit more sense. Now, so when we're basically done loading will be false right from the start, and then when we say done loading again, we will pass in the value of true, and then we can go and set our done loading to this value that was passed in. Right, and then after that, I want to call notify listeners. Okay, so let's just see if you get this part. So basically all I've done is to add a new done loading there. Done loading will be false, so when the app starts, it will be false, and it will load the shared preferences. When we are done loading this shared preferences, we will set this, or we will call done loading, pass in the value of true. True will be set to done loading, and we will notify all the listeners, and then we will stop that loading screen from running, and we will start this setting screen. Okay, so it's just my way of showing you how to also implement something like a loading screen. So yes, we could have had this loading part in a different file or in a different model and also in a different class, and then provide that as part of this multi-providers. So that is 100% fine. But because everything we're doing currently is just loading these shared preferences, which is part of the theme still. So for my case now, everything still fits nicely. Right, so that's all we're going to add here. Let's go back to the main page. So for the main page, which is, or the My App, we will see we've got a multi-provider, we've got the consumer, there's the material app. So basically here in this return statement, we want to either return back the material app or we want to return back a loading screen, depending on that value that we have here. And that value, let me just show you here. We can go to value now, and we can go to dot, and there's the done loading now. So if it's done loading, then we want to show the material app. That's fine. But at the end, if we are not done loading, we want to call the loading screen. Okay. So we do not have loading screen yet, so let's create it here at the bottom. So let me just use, I'm going to use a stateful widget for this, and I'm going to show you now why. So we're going to use a loading screen there. Okay, so you can see right from the start we've got a black screen now because done loading is still false. So basically what we're doing inside of here, we're saying if that value of done loading is true, then we show this material app with the settings page. If it's false, we will show the loading screen. Right, so now for this loading screen, we will need a context. And the context is needed because we need to get to this value called done loading so that we can actually change that value. And you remember that we used this function called done loading. So I want to call done loading. In order to do that, I need to, in my loading screen, also have the context. So I can say context.read and so forth. Okay, so what we're going to do is for this loading screen, we will pass in the context. So right at the top, we will have a final build context, and let's call it context. So we will pass in the context there, and we will accept it here inside of the constructor as required. And let's just use it this dot context. Right, and then at the top where we use it, we will need to pass in the context, and it can just be this context that we have there that was passed in. Okay, so that's all our loading screen will need from this My App. Okay, so we pass in the context. Now we have the context here and we can start doing what we want to do. And the reason why I have this loading screen as a stateful widget is because I need access to this function called initState. So I want to initialize something right before I start this build function. Right, so let's say the function that we're going to use here in order to get the data will be called getData. And what I'm trying to simulate here is, let's say that you've got an application that reads data from an online database or maybe from a JSON file or from wherever. You will do everything inside of this getData, not only your shared preferences. Okay, so I'm going to use this as an async because we'll basically be returning some sort of future, although it's not returning a future, but it's doing something. It's loading some data. So you could use this loading screen also when getting data back from a JSON file, getting data back from an online database, and now at the same time, we're also getting it back from that shared preferences file. But the shared preferences file is a lot faster than getting data from the internet. But you did see that small little gap where it actually seems like the app was actually flashing. So I don't like that. So what we're going to do inside of this getData, we're just going to say await. Now, for now, we're simulating connecting to the internet. So we're going to say future dot delayed, and you can see it needs a duration. Now, for the duration, we will just use a duration object there. And you can see for the duration, you can either send in days or hours or minutes or seconds. So let's just halt the application for a few seconds. Let's make it 4 seconds so we can nicely see our image. So it will be awaiting a future delayed. We will wait for 4 seconds. And this part here is simulating. And you remember when we did the JSON data, we also used the wait. And if you look at that, it basically takes about 2, 3 to 4 seconds to get the data from online. And that's what we're simulating here. Okay, so then after you got that data, we can then go and set that value or call this function called done loading, because then we are done with all the loading work. And remember that inside of your main.dart, where does that happen? Here in this create, we are actually creating theme settings that starts that loading process for us. So while that is busy, we will be showing the loading screen and just simulating that it's actually happening in this part. Okay, so for now, I need to get this context. So just remember that this class is in its own. It starts there and closes there. So I don't have direct access to context there. So in order to get the context, this context is part of the state class's widget, which is loading screen. Okay, so it's a widget dot, and you can see there's context. Okay, so just remember when you're using stateful widgets, in order to get your values that was passed in, you need to refer to widget dot whatever you called it. So it's widget dot context, and then we can use read here. So this read now is part of provider. Okay, so what do we need to read? What is the type we want to read from? Again, it's this theme settings. Okay, on that theme settings, I will have access to all these. And now I can call done loading. And I'm going to set done loading to actually setting the value to true, which means I've called this function now called done loading. It's a setter, and that's why I'm using the equal sign. So I know this could be confusing where you're actually passing in a value, but in our case, it's a setter. And because it's a setter, you use the equal sign. Okay, instead of passing it in, but it's the same as passing it in. So that value will then be set to done loading, which is true, and will notify all listeners. Where's the listener? Well, there it is. The spot there listens for it, and if it changes, it will start running Material App. Okay, so we're just going to say widget.context.read, theme settings, call done loading, and set it to true. Okay. Just remember, you cannot use watch here because watch needs to be part of the widget tree. Right, and now inside of this init state is where I'm going to call this getData. So I'm going to call getData there. It will start doing this in the background for 4 seconds. And while it's doing this, it will show this loading page for us. Okay, so let's just build our loading page quickly. So this container, we will not be using a container. We will be using a Material App again, but this time we're not going to set any themes or anything like that. So it will be a Material App, with a home as a normal scaffold. The scaffold will have a body that will be in the center of the screen. Let's have a child that could be a normal column. For that column, let's set the main axis alignment as main axis alignment.center, and let's have some children. Okay, so now we know it's in the center of the screen. The column is also centered, so right in the center of the screen, we can start showing that picture. So we can go to image.asset, indicate your image. Where is it? So in our case, it's under Assets, Images, Logo. So I'm going to say Assets / Images / Logo.png. After that, I'm just going to use a normal text widget to say something loading or something like that. So I'm just going to say getting the magic ready, please wait. Okay, and that's all. Let's save it and see what we've got. And there you can see company name, getting the magic ready, please wait. Right, excellent. Now let's run this thing again, right from the start. There you can see the logo, done, and I see my settings page. Okay, run it again. You will see for 4 seconds, you'll see this logo, getting the magic ready, please wait, and then when it's done, it goes to this part. So please just note that this part is not normally something that you add inside of your application. In our case, yes, it's working fine. It seems like we're loading some data. But actually, I could have made this even 1 second, and 1 second should be enough for that shared preferences to load. So if we open up that, okay, I could not even see the picture there. So maybe 1 second is too fast. But for 2 seconds, we can show that picture just quickly, and then it goes over. Okay, so it's quite fast that the shared preferences actually loads your data. But normally this part will read from either a JSON file, or you will read from an online database, or whatever you want to do to get your data ready. All right, so let's see some changes. If I make this change then there, and I run it again, we will see that company name, and there we've got, okay, changing it back again to dark theme, running it again, see some sort of loading screen, and then we're over. Okay, and that is basically it for this video. I did not want to show you a load screen, but this really irritates me if you need to change the theme and then you come back and it shows a small few milliseconds of white there. It's irritating. Okay, so I'd rather do something like a loading screen. Okay, so that's the idea behind shared preferences. Shared preferences is just saving small pieces of data. And in our case, we actually saved just this Boolean, just this one value, the dark theme. We did not save done loading, but we're using it as part of provider. But we saved the dark theme, and we loaded back that dark theme when we are done. Or when the app starts again, we load back that dark theme. And the provider helped me tremendously in doing exactly this. Thank you very much for watching this video. See you in the next one.